Hi everyone! After completing the not-so-simple project of the Apache helicopter, which took a lot of time and on which I practiced with 3D printed parts from polymer resin, I want something special. There is one plane that I have been wanting to assemble for a very long time, but unfortunately, in my favorite 48th scale, there was not one that would satisfy me. I met only 2 models in the 48th scale, which were produced in the 90s. For some reason, such good models manufacturers as Great Wall Hobby or Takom or Meng and even Trumpeter, who released models of anything, passed this plane by. And now that day has come. Eduard produced a Sukhoi Su-25 Frogfoot. In box, as usual photo etching, resin, 3D printed parts, huge decals and masks for transparent parts. You can learn more about the kit in a short video review of the model using the link in the description of this video. In this video, there will also be a small experiment. In parallel with the assembly, I will tell you the story of the real Su-25, a short history of its creation, characteristics, combat use, and also about its service in the Air Force of Ukraine. It is these planes that perform daily combat missions in the east and south of my country and deter the aggressor who invaded Ukraine. I chose an interesting prototype for this model. This will be the 32nd board of the 299th Tactical Aviation Brigade with very interesting and non-standard weapons for it. The model I start to assemble according to the instructions from the cockpit using only complete parts and complete photo etching. I carefully process the parts and prepare them for assembly. In general, for the model, I will hardly use a third-party aftermarket, only a few small things, since Eduard saturated the model itself with a large set of additions. In a real airplane, there is an awning on the visor of the instrument panel that covers part of the equipment. It is not reproduced in the model, so I will make it myself. What will help me is a napkin, from which I will cut the right size, and matte acrylic varnish with which I will fix the awning on the visor. Well, what about Su-25? Russia has a long tradition of yielding aircraft that fly at low level. In a port of ground troops, one that goes back to the Second World War, with the Ilyushin IL-2 Sturmovik being the most famous of all. Early in the 1970s, this tradition continued with the Sukhoi Su-25, which received the name Frogfoot by NATO. The Su-25 is a rugged, robust and very maneuverable jet that is specifically designed to provide close air support for the Soviet ground forces. It has twin engines, long wings with many hardpoints for a variety of weapons, both guided and unguided. According to my idea, in cockpit will be pilot and the canopy will be closed. The plane will be in pre-flight readiness, and I also have a nice little idea for a dioramas. For painting the cockpit, I used Hatak acrylic paint A047, the color of the Soviet aircraft cockpit. But as it turned out, in the future the shade did not match the color of the photo etch from Eduard's set. So I had to lighten the color under in order to match the colors of the photo etch. The complete photo etch kit contains all the necessary parts to improve both the interior and exterior of the model. 2 options for instrument panels and many different antennas for different modifications of the aircraft. By the way, if you are not assembling one of the options offered by the instructions, you need to consider when assembling exactly which modification you are assembling and be guided by real photos in order to use on the model exactly those antennas that were on the prototype of the aircraft you are assembling. The specification of the model is that after the assembly of the hull halves, it will not be possible to insert the ending gear, so they must be pre-assembled and primed before assembling the fuselage of the aircraft. And friends, if you like what I do, like my videos, subscribe to the channel and like it. Be sure to turn on the bell to be the first to know about the release of a new video and write your wishes in the comments. Thank you. and I prime it all with a black primer microfilar from Alclad 2. A little about the real plane. In March 1969, a competition was announced by the Soviet Air Force that called for designs for a new battlefield close support aircraft. Participants in the competition were the Sukhoi Design Bureau and the design bureaus of Yakovlev, Ilyushin and Mikoyan. Sukhoi finalized its T-8 design in late 1968 and began in work on the first two prototypes in January 1972. The T-8-1, the first airframe to be assembled, was completed just before a major national holiday on May 9, 1974. However, it did not make its first flight until February 22, 1975, after a long series of test flights. The Su-25 surpassed its main competitor in the Soviet Air Force competition, the Ilyushin Il-102, and series production was announced by the Ministry of Defense. During flight testing phases of the T-8-1 and T-8-2 prototypes development, the Sukhoi Design Bureau's management proposed that the series production of the Su-25 should start at Factory No. 31 in Tbilisi, Soviet Republic of Georgia, which at that time was the major manufacturing base for the MiG-21 trainer. After negotiations and completion of all stages of the state trials, the Soviet Ministry of Aircraft Production authorized manufacture of the Su-25 at Tbilisi, allowing series production to start in 1978. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, several Su-25 variants appeared, including modernized versions, and variants for specialized roles. The most significant designs were the Su-25 UB dual-seat trainer, the Su-25BM target towing variant, and the Su-25T for anti-tank missions. In addition, a Su-25KM prototype was developed by Georgia in cooperation with Israeli company Elbit Systems in 2001. But so far this variant has not achieved much commercial success. The Su-25 is the only armored aircraft still in production in 2007. Well, let's go back to the model. When the cockpit tub is painted, I glue it to the front wheel bay. Next, you can glue photo etching, which I fix on cyanoacrylate glue for reliability. On the side panels, before gluing the photo etching, I remove the excess relief. Eduard's color photo etch side panels and instrument panels are as always of the best quality. Perfect printing, no offset, bright colors and a good match to the original. According to the instructions, you need to make the engine control handle yourself. I made it from a heated and stretched sprue and painted it black. The cockpit is ready. I glue it to one half of the fuselage. The cockpit is ready, and while the assembly is in progress, I will tell you a little more about the real Su-25. The Su-25 has a normal aerodynamic layout with a shoulder-mounted trapezoidal wing and a conventional tailplane and rudder. Several different metals in differing amounts are used in the construction of the airframe: 60% aluminium, 19% steel, 13.5% titanium, 2% magnesium alloy, and 5.5% other materials. All versions of the Su-25 have a metal cantilever wing, of moderate sweep and high aspect ratio, and equipped with high lift devices. The wing consists of two cantilever sections attached to a central torsion box, forming a single unit with the fuselage. The air brakes are housed in separate fairings at the tip of each wing. Each wing has 5 hardpoints for weapons carriage, with the attachment points mounted on load-bearing ribs and spars. Each wing also features a 5-section leading-edge slat, a two-section flap, and an aileron. The flaps are mounted by steel sliders and rollers, attached to brackets on the rear spar. The trapezoidal ailerons are located near the wingtips. The fuselage of the Su-25 has an ellipsoidal section and is of semi-monocoque, stressed skin construction, arranged as a longitudinal load-bearing framework of longerons, beams and stringers, with a transverse load-bearing assembly of frames. The one-piece horizontal tailplane is attached to the load-bearing frame at two mounting points. Early versions of the Su-25 were equipped with two R95SH non-afterburning turbojets, in separate compartments on either side of the rear fuselage. The engines, sub-assemblies, and surrounding fuselage structure are cooled by air provided by the cold air intakes located on top of the engine's nacelles. A drainage system collects oil, hydraulic fluid residues, and fuel from the engines after flight or after an unsuccessful start. The engine control systems allows independent operation of each engine. The cannon is located in a compartment beneath the cockpit, mounted on a load-bearing beam attached to the cockpit floor and the forward fuselage support structure. The nose is fitted with distinctive twin pitot probes and hinges up for service access. And while I was telling all this unnecessary information for you, the fuselage of the model is ready. It is also important not to forget to put extra weight in the nose of the plane to prevent it from tipping over onto the tail. I use steel balls from bearings that I also drop into paint cans for easy mixing of the paint before use. The halves of the body are assembled quite simply. They do not need putty after the glue dries. I just lightly clean the gluing seams and restore the lines of the panels where necessary and continue to... Fucking Russians. I'm sorry, 1 minute please. Now I can go back to work. The halves of the body are assembled quite simply. They do not need putty after the glue dries. I just lightly clean the gluing seams and restore the lines of the panels where necessary and continue to assemble the model. And while I build and paint air intakes, engines and jet exhaust nozzles, I will briefly tell you about the existing modifications of the Su-25. Between 1978 and 1989, 582 single-seat Su-25s were produced in Georgia, not including aircraft produced under the Su-25K export program. This variant of the aircraft represents the backbone of the Russian Air Force's Su-25 fleet, currently the largest in the world. The aircraft experienced a number of accidents in operational service caused by system failures attributed to salvo firing of weapons. In the wake of these incidents, use of its main armament, the 240mm S-24 missile, was prohibited. In its place, the FAB 500 kg general-purpose high-explosive bomb became the primary armament. The Su-25UB trainer was drawn up in 1977. The first prototype, called T-8UB1, was rolled out in July 1985, and its maiden flight was carried out at the Ulan-Ude factory airfield on August 12 of that year. By the end of 1986, 25 Su-25UBs had been produced at Ulan-Ude before the twin-seater completed its state trials and officially cleared for service with the Soviet Air Force. It was intended for training and evaluation flights of active-duty pilots, and for training pilot cadets at Soviet Air Force flying schools. The performance did not differ substantially from that of the single-seater. The navigation, attack, sighting devices and weapons control systems of the two-seater enabled it to be used for both routine training and weapons training missions. These are the two main modifications that were used exclusively for the Air Force of the USSR, in whose time I assembled the main landing gear. The assembly is quite complicated. It consists of many parts. And the most important thing during assembly is to set the angle of the racks perfectly so that the model stands flat without falling to one side after completion. Next, the assembly of the same cantilever wings of moderate sweep. For gluing large surfaces, I use liquid but strong UHU plastic special glue. There is only one problem. If it is not used for a long time, the glue dries in the middle of the needle. To clean, you just need to heat the needle well over an open fire and all the glue inside will burn and you can use it again. The halves of the wings were joined very well. Then I clamp them for a reliable fixation so that there is no displacement, and let them dry. And while I'm building the wings, glue them to the model, putty the cracks and restore the panel's lines. I tell you about another 2 modifications of the Su-25. The basic Su-25 model was used as the basis for a commercial export variant, known as the Su-25K. The aircraft differed from the Soviet Air Force version in certain minor details concerning internal equipment. A total of 180 Su-25K aircraft were built between 1984 and 1989. Some 27 countries ordered the aircraft, with most of them still operating them and now. Sukhoi did, however, build a small number of similar tandem seat trainers for the Soviet Navy under the designation Su-25UTG. These aircraft were designed for practicing carrier landings, and had strengthened fuselages plus a Stinger type arresting hook. Initial flight of the prototype was in September 1988, with its first landing on the Soviet carrier Tbilisi, later the Admiral Kuznetsov, in November 1989. 10 production aircraft were built, with 5 each going to the Russian Republic and Ukraine after the fall of the USSR. The Russian Navy then requested 10 more trainers from Sukhoi, to be converted from standard Su-25UBs and given the designation Su-25UBP. They were to be similar to the Su-25UTG but would also have a retractable in-flight refueling probe. It is unclear if any Su-25UBPs were ever actually delivered. The wings are ready. It's time for the laser rangefinder located in the bow of the Su-25. On this model, unfortunately, it is not modeled at all. There is only a transparent hole from it. That is, the entire nose part consists of a transparent part. I will try to do something myself. I paint with black paint in the middle. I cut out a small square from the mirror adhesive tape to winterize the laser glass inside. On a real Su-25, the glass of the laser rangefinder is not transparent. I imitate this moment with the holographic self-adhesive tape with a green tint. I just cut it to the size I need and glue it from the middle of the transparent part. A very good and realistic result. Next, I masked the transparent part with the help of complete paper masks and continued to build the model. I glue the rudders of the plane one by one, in parts, from bottom to top. It is impossible to install them in a different order. As well as various antennas and control devices for horizontal stabilizers. A small addition that was not part of the model is resin air intakes from Quick Boost QB49043. They are cast in very good quality and add more realism to the model. To install them, you need to cut the plastic parts that have fallen off the model with a knife. Prepare the place before installation and glue the resin ones in the right places. You also need to pay attention to the photos of the real plane that you will build, as there are also options for installing them on different modifications. Next, I assemble the horizontal stabilizers, glue the protective armored shield over the pilot's head, and also mask and glue the cockpit canopy in place. I will glue the transparent parts with ultra glue from Amomeg. It does not leave gaps and gives a lot of time for positioning the part on the model as it dries for a long time. Also, if necessary, it can be easily dismantled after gluing. Next, I paint the canopy in the same color as the interior. And while I'm doing all this, I'll tell you about another interesting modification of the Su-25 that never went into production. The Su-25T is a dedicated anti-tank version, which has been combat tested with notable success in Chechnya. The variant was converted to one-seater, with the rear seat replaced by additional avionics. It has all-weather and night attack capability. In addition to the full arsenal of weapons of the standard Su-25, the Su-25T can employ the KB-500KR TV-guided bomb and the semi-active laser-guided KH-25ML. Its enlarged nose cone houses the Shkval optical TV and aiming system with the prickle laser rangefinder and target designator. It can also carry Vika laser-guided, tube-launched missiles. For night operations, the low-light TV Mercury pod system can be carried under the fuselage. 3 Su-25TS prototypes were built in 1983–86 and 8 production aircraft were built in 1990. With the introduction of a definitive Russian Air Force Su-25 upgrade program, in the form of Stroyovoy Modernizirovanyi, the Su-25T program was officially cancelled in 2000. A second-generation Su-25T, the Su-25TM, also designated Su-39, has been developed with improved navigation and attack systems, and better survivability. While retaining the built-in Shkval of Su-25T, it may carry Copio radar in the container under fuselage, which is used for engaging air targets as well as ships. The Russian Air Force has received 8 aircraft as of 2008. Some of the improved avionics systems designed for T and TM variants have been included in the Su-25SM, an interim upgrade of the operational Russian Air Force Su-25, for improved survivability and combat capability. The Su-25TM, as an all-inclusive upgrade program, has been replaced with the affordable Su-25SM program. Well, after assembling the necessary parts and gluing all the antennas, the model is ready for priming and painting. Before starting the painting work, the plastic must be degreased. I remove unglued horizontal stabilizers to facilitate priming and painting both the model and the stabilizers themselves. There is a lot of grease left on the plastic from the factory after pulling it out of the press molds, and your fingers also leave greasy spots on plastic. There is no way to avoid this, so for better adhesion of the primer, you must degrease the plastic with alcohol or special degreasers for plastic. I choose isopropyl alcohol because I am sure that it will not harm the plastic. As the main layer, I use the black primer microfilar Alclad 2. It has good adhesion to plastic and reveals problem areas that need to be finished before painting the models. If such moments are found, I treat them with putty, clean them with sandpaper, and once again cover with a layer of primer. This is repeated as many times as necessary. I almost forgot to make holes for the future formation of pitot tubes. This should be done before painting so as not to damage it in the future when drilling holes. I apply it in a thin layer so as not to cover the panel's lines, because in the future there will be several more layers on the plastic. It will be paint and a lot of varnish. I continue to prime and in parallel with the main body of the aircraft, prime all individual parts such as wheels of the landing gear, horizontal stabilizers and others. After the first layer has completely dried, I will lighten the panels with the same primer with a microfilar from Alclad 2 White. I apply a thin layer of white color on the desired panel, thereby brightening them. This is a long and painstaking work, but with the correct further painting of the model, it will give a very good effect on the uniformity of the painting of the aircraft, and its aging during use. It's time to paint the model. I chose the paint that I have already used more than once. This is Hatak HTK AC109 kit for Ukrainian Grey Pixel. The set contains 6 cans of 18 ml of acrylic paint. These sets also exist with lacquer-based paint, but since I'm used to painting with acrylics, I always chose this particular set. On the back of the box there are instructions for using each color. I use the paint from the box, adding a little retarder to prevent the paint from drying out on the airbrush needle. I start painting from the lower part of the case, since there is a single color on the entire plane. Cover the pre-shading with a thin layer so as not to cover it completely. Since it is an acrylic paint, it dries quite quickly and you can continue painting in about 30 minutes. Complete drying of the paint is 24 hours. Next, I will cover the lower part of the wing with masking tape to prevent paint from getting in and to give a clear line of transition between the upper and lower colors of the aircraft. Now I apply the base color to the upper part of the fuselage of the model, completely covering it with a thin layer and let the model dry for a day before continuing painting. To simulate camouflage spots, I will use the well-known Foxbot company that produces decals and masks for modern aviation of Ukraine. Large, colorful and clear instructions with instructions for using paint and applying identification marks. To simplify the work, I remove the unnecessary part of the plate tape from the base and number each part of the livery according to the instructions to facilitate the subsequent application of masks to the model. The masks themselves are quite elastic and easily lie on uneven surfaces, which makes it easier to work with them, but the adhesive layer is quite strong, so before applying it to the model, you need to loosen it by gluing the mask several times to your hand or a degreased surface. Thus, when removing the mask after painting, you will not damage the previous layer of paint. And one more tip: do not leave the masks for a long time on the model and do not heat them. This can damage the lower layer of paint, or the glue can remain on the surface of the model. 2 types of digital camouflage can be found on modern Ukrainian Su-25s. The first and main one is gray from below and 4 shades of gray from above, but there are simplified versions with 3 shades of gray, but the scheme remains approximately the same. The spots of dark gray color are painted with medium gray. This is the livery of the plane that I plan to make. I start applying camouflage colors from lighter to darker. First, light gray color. It was not possible to apply all the spots of the first color in one go, so I divided into 2, allowing the paint to dry well for several hours between painting. After applying the light gray, I paint the spots medium gray and let the paint dry completely for 24 hours before painting all Theodar transparent panels of the plane mouse gray. And while I'm doing it, I'll tell you about the combat use of the Su-25 in various conflicts. The 1st Soviet Air Force's Su-25 unit was the 200th Independent Attack Squadron, initially based at Sidolkay Air Base in the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic. The first 11 aircraft arrived at Sidolkay in May 1981. On July 19, 1981, the 200th Independent Attack Squadron was reassigned to Shindand Air Base in western Afghanistan, becoming the first Su-25 unit deployed to that country. Its main task was to conduct airstrikes against mountain military positions and structures controlled by the Afghan rebels. Another Soviet Su-25 unit was the 368th Attack Aviation Regiment, which was formed on July 12, 1984, at Zhovnovoy in Ukraine. It was soon also moved east to conduct operations over Afghanistan. Over the course of the Soviet war in Afghanistan, Su-25s launched a total of 139 guided missiles of all types against Mujahideen positions. On average, each aircraft performed 360 sorties a year, a total considerably higher than that of any other combat aircraft in Afghanistan. By the end of the war, nearly 50 Su-25s were deployed at Afghan airbases, carrying out a total of 60,000 sorties. Between the first deployment in 1981 and the end of the war in 1989, 21 aircraft were lost in combat operations. The Su-25 also saw combat during the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988. The first Su-25s were commissioned by the Iraqi Air Force in 1987 and performed approximately 900 combat sorties throughout the course of the war, carrying out the bulk of Iraqi air attack missions. During the most intense combat of the war, Iraqi Su-25s were performing up to 15 sorties per day each. In one recorded incident, an Iraqi Su-25 was shot down by an Iranian Hawk surface-to-air missile, but the pilot managed to eject. During the Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm, the air superiority of the coalition forces was so great that the majority of Iraqi Su-25s did not even manage to get airborne. On January 25, 1991, 7 Iraqi Air Force Su-25s fled from Iraq and landed in Iran. The Su-25 also took part in First and Second Chechen War on 1994 and 1999 Years, Ethiopian-Eritrean War on May 2000, 2001 Insurgency in the Republic of Macedonia, War in Darfur, Ivorian-French clashes, Russia, Georgia War on 2008. November 1, 2012, 2 Iranian Su-25s fired at a USAF MQ-1 Predator drone 16 nautical miles off the Iranian coast. The Iranian government has claimed that the drone violated its airspace. And since 2014, Su-25s have been used by both sides in the Russian-Ukrainian war. After the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, Ukrainian Su-25s began to apply yellow and blue identification stripes to prevent friendly fire from the ground. This camouflage was popularly called anti-Mikola. In yellow and blue colors were painted the bottom of the planes, the steering surfaces on the wings and vertical stabilizers, as well as the lower halves of the fuel tanks suspended under the wings. The war in Ukraine has been going on for the 3rd year. This is a high-intensity war. A lot of ammunition is used on a daily basis. There is also a lot of aviation weapons. Unfortunately, the stocks of Soviet production for aviation equipment are getting smaller and smaller. But Ukrainian designers and technicians were able to adapt several samples of Western aviation weapons. For example, French air bombs ASM Hammer. This aviation weaponry, which Ukraine receives as part of military aid from France, is actively used for strikes against the occupiers. ASM is a kit for free-falling unguided aerial bombs that turns them into highly accurate ones. The kit consists of a front part with a guidance system and flaps and a rear part with a rocket accelerator designed to increase the range of the ammunition. To continue the use of attack aircraft of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in particular, the United States transferred Zuni anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine, which were available in warehouses. These unguided air-to-ground missiles are designed to hit ground targets, fortifications, other objects and convoys of enemy equipment, but about them a little later. Now I'm painting the landing gear and landing gear bays light blue. The main painting of the aircraft can be considered complete. All that remains is to cover the model with a thick protective layer of transparent glossy varnish from Tamiya X22 and let it dry well for at least 24 hours. I also want to remind you friends not to forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video, and write your impressions in the comments. For everyone interested in my channel, there is an opportunity to sign up for a sponsorship subscription. This will provide access to additional content. Due to the difficult situation in the country with electricity because of the Russians' regular shelling of my country's energy infrastructure, I'm raising funds for a charging station to ensure uninterrupted content creation for the channel. And so the varnish has dried, which means that it's time to glue the decals. And these are the decals that I very often use for models of modern aviation, which is in service with Ukraine by the manufacturer Foxbot. Chic printing, thin base and at the same time strong. All we need for this is a knife, tweezers, water and a special liquid for fixed decals on the surface from Tamiya Mark Fit Strong. At the same time, it softens the decal, giving time to smooth it out on the surface and insert all the panel lines, and firmly welds the decal to the surface, which prevents further damage to the decal, even if you apply paint masks to them. I apply the liquid to the surface of the model, glue the decal, position it with the help of tweezers or a toothpick and dab the excess with an ear stick, smoothing it to the surface. Everything is simple. The main thing is to carefully follow the instructions and do not forget to check the available photos of the real plane that you are building, since not all identification marks or stencils can be applied to a real plane. After complete drying of the decals, which takes about 5 to 6 hours, I apply a second layer of glossy varnish from Tamiya X22 and let the model dry again for 24 hours. The next step in building the model will be the selection of panel lines with a wash. I will use the already well-known liquid from the AK Interactive Panel Line Air series, which contains 5 jars of oil-based liquid for different types of camouflage such as brown and green, gray and blue, sand and desert, winter white, and black camo. What can I say about this liquid that it has a fairly good fluidity? I sometimes dilute it a little with white spirit when I need to clearly fill the panel lines with a wash. Also, it dries quickly enough, and if you leave it for a long time, it does not eat away the paint as much as ordinary oil paints do. You can easily remove the residue with a solvent. Tamiya liquid for panel lines is also my favorite, but unfortunately I didn't have the right color for gray camouflage, and I don't want to spoil the model with ordinary oil paints, so I use AK Interactive liquid. After applying the liquid to the model, I let it dry for 10 to 15 minutes, after which I remove the excess with a soft paper napkin and in difficult places with an ear swab dipped in solvent. Since the model is covered with a thick layer of glossy Tamiya varnish, I don't worry about the paint. After wash, I apply the final liquid to the model. It is a satin varnish from Vallejo that dries on the eyes. This varnish has proven itself very well. I have used it many times. It has a good satin effect. But there is a problem with intensive use of a brush on the surface of the varnish, or other mechanical action with the model. The varnish is easily removed from the surface. And literally in a short time I continue working on the model by painting the hydraulic stops on the chassis of the plane with Molotov's liquid chrome. And also paint the panels near the aircraft cannon using Alclad 2 duraluminum paint. Time for weathering. Oil brushes from Ammo MiG in several colors such as earth, black, dark brown and several other colors will help me in this. In thin lines along the wings and fuselage, in the opposite direction from the flight of the plane, I apply thin strips of paint in different colors. And without letting the paint dry, I simulate leakage and contamination on the model by rubbing with a soft brush dipped in solvent. In this case, the main thing is to control the amount of paint on the model and focus on photos of real planes to realistically reproduce the contamination on the surface. I use black oil paint to imitate hooves and soot in places where it is needed. You also need to pay attention to the places where the plane is refueled, as there are always fuel residues that grow during flight. And peacetime. As a rule, There is no dirt or fuel on the planes. Technicians monitor cleanliness. But planes that perform daily combat missions simply do not have time for this. Time to get back to Zuni. For a long time I could not decide with which weapon I should assemble the model. But after I saw a video and a photo of the use of this weapon on our planes, I decided to use it. As practice shows, only 2 containers were hung under the wings of the plane. It is quite unusual to see a Su-25 with such weapons. For a long time I could not find the containers I needed in the 48th scale, and Eduard helped me with his resin additions. The pylon for attaching the container to the plane had to be manufactured independently, as it was specially designed by our engineers and does not exist in resin or plastic. First, I paint the LAU-10 containers in a bright yellow color. This is necessary in order, after applying the basic black matte color, to simulate abrasions on the containers, which are clearly visible in the photo of aircraft using Zuni in Ukraine during combat missions. I use black matte paint from ICM. I also apply it to rockets as a base color. After the paint has dried, with the help of a sand sponge, I lightly imitate scratches on the containers so that the yellow color appears. The main thing is not to overdo it and repaint the containers again. Just look at the photo and reproduce it on the model. A little about the history of these rockets. The Zuni 5-inch folding fin aircraft rocket, or simply Zuni, 127mm unguided rocket developed by the Hunter Douglas Division of Bridgeport Brass Company, and deployed by the United States Armed Forces and the French Air Force. The rocket was developed for both air-to-air and air-to-ground operations. It can be used to carry various types of warheads, including chaff for countermeasures. It is usually fired from the LAU-10 rocket pod holding 4 rockets. Zuni rockets were first used in combat by F-86F Sabres belonging to the Pakistan Air Force during the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965. Sailors aboard Forrestal battle a massive ordnance fire triggered by a Zuni rocket. The Zuni was widely used in the ground attack role during the Vietnam War. On May 1, 1967, during a sortie against Kep Air Base, North Vietnam, Lieutenant Commander Theodore R. Swartz of Squadron VA-76, flying from USS Bonhomme Richard, shot down a MiG-17 with Zuni rockets. This was the only MiG aircraft to be downed by a Douglas A-4 Skyhawk during the Vietnam War. Lieutenant Commander Swartz received the Silver Star for his action. Later that year, improper handling of a Mk-32 Zuni rocket and other munitions was responsible for a serious fire aboard USS Forrestal aircraft carrier, which killed 134 men. In January 2023, the United States announced that it would be supplying 4,000 Zuni rockets to the armed forces of Ukraine for use in the Russo-Ukrainian War. The U.S. transferred its last supplies of Zuni rockets to Ukraine. In June 2024, it was reported that Ukraine had expended its supply of Zuni rockets, possibly indicating the extinction of the weapon system. This is how the history of this weapon ended. Well, friends, this is the final stage of the Su-25 assembly. There is very little left. Cover the wheels with dust from concrete using a pigment from Ammo MIG Light Dust. I applied pigment to the rubber with an U-pick. I removed the excess with the other side of the ear stick. I don't use any pigment fixers in this case as the paint is matte on the wheels and the pigment sticks well to the surface. And I install the wheels in their places. It's also time to remove the paint masks, install the aircraft cannon, angle of attack sensors and pitot tubes. Also, with the help of a marker with liquid chrome from the Molotov, I imitate the deflectors and the landing lights on the ends of the wings. One of the last steps is gluing weapons and pylons under the wings. I return the horizontal stabilizers to their place. He also independently produced the combined units for firing heat traps and ADROs, depot reflectors KUV-2650-01, which were installed on the Su-25 after undergoing modernization to the M1 version. That's all, the model is ready. I hope you enjoyed this video. I also want to tell you that I recently created an account on the Patreon platform. There will be additional content that will not be published anywhere else. There is already a video on painting the resin pilot for this model. By subscribing to Patreon, you help me raise funds for a charging station for uninterrupted content creation. Thank you in advance. See you in the next videos.